Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first panel on controversy. I am so happy to be here for the sake of time. I'm just going to introduce this first brilliant presenter and get out the way. I'm always happy to show HBCU love to a brilliant person like this. Our first panelist is Mr. Christopher Daniels. He is an award-winning journalist, cultural critic, ethnomusicologist, and a professional development coordinator, and one of the finest minds on Prince you will ever find. So I'm going to get out the way. And Brother Daniels, go ahead and make it funky.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Always a good time with you guys. D'Angela, you're brilliant. Thank you so much for always making sure that I'm here and that we're all together to celebrate one of the most brilliant minds to ever do anything. So naturally, last year, I talked to you guys in detail about, how Black and brown journalists played a role in really solidifying the success of the Dirty Mind record. But when you look at this particular album sleeve this year, as opposed to the box spring on the last one, it does bring up some interesting questions about how media plays into this particular project also. So, of course, looking at what I normally look at, we're just going to look at how Prince used controversy to address the news cycle of the early 1980s, specifically 1980, 1981. Y'all see what I did there with the bottom: conceptualize, research, organize, and present it. Wink, wink. All right. He looking fly right there, right? And just because we're not, in the flesh, don't mean I can't look fly for y'all like I always do. But here's the scoop. All right. So Controversy was Prince's fourth studio EP that was released October 14th, 1981. And this was a very interesting project for a number of reasons. The Lin LM1 drum machine that we got accustomed to hearing in the next few albums over really made its debut on this particular project. But interestingly enough, this was also the very first record where Prince actually started to really bring up religious references in his music. And also, more importantly, in the context of this particular piece, we're looking at his subconsciousness and how blatantly he infused that into his subject matter in this particular project. Album went gold before it went platinum in 1985. And also, threw a little chart posting there for y'all. Check it out. Black album, not quite R&B yet. So the man did his thing. Okay, so the album itself was a really, really interesting piece. And coming out of something like Dirty Mind, where, to your right, you see him in the briefs and the leggings and, just a scantily clad, garb. And of course, critics and other people alike really started to pay close attention to how he looked. And they tried to basically conflate that with maybe trying to figure out what his sexual orientation was and trying to figure out how he really thought about things in terms of religion and even just some of his personal politics, right? But what he was able to do with the title track itself, 7 minutes of straight laced pulsating funk, right? Probably the dopest records that he's ever done. It really gave him an opportunity to really use music as somewhat of his Twitter feed to really just kind of address, the public's concern about how he looked and whether he was into men or women, just all these interesting sort of thoughts that we kind of had in our mind. I'm sure many of you all grew up in a place where your family probably said something, that man right there dressed looking weird. Is he a boy? Is he a girl? But the song itself really allowed for him to really respond to those questions in a very rhetorical sense. And it was more or less a case for him to really bring that to the forefront. But also, too, in the midst of that, you get the Lord's Prayer in there. But then you also get that quatrain. Remember, people call me rude. I wish we all were new. I wish there were no black. I wish there were no rules. So it's really somewhat establishing his whole idea of outside of you focusing on the headlines and focusing on, what critics might think or focusing on what the public might perceive about me. This is kind of how we should be thinking about things. I wish there was an even balance and you didn't even have to think about me or anybody else in that regard. And then, of course, the follow-up cut, Sexuality, was really an opportunity for him to really balance that and really showcase, maybe if we just limit how we perceive people and everybody was on an equal playing field, then we wouldn't have no reason to have controversy in the first place. All right. And interestingly enough, some critics really did pay close attention to how controversy was really sort of elevating his status as a musician, as a storyteller, and even more so as a public figure. there was an interesting, post in the New York Times, December of 1981, that literally made it a point to say that controversy was every indication of equaling or exceeding Dirty Mind, but it was also a calculated bit of outrage. In other words, for Prince, sexual liberation is both a political program and a religion. One agrees with this message or not, it can't be denied that Prince backs it up with exceptional musical talent. Prince's black and white synthesis isn't just a picture of what could be, it's a prophecy. So again, even, critics in the mainstream press really started to notice that something was just a little bit elevated with what he was doing. No one could deny, musically how good he was, or just even that it was just going to be something different each time. But it was definitely an opportunity for him to really bring up some interesting things that he otherwise wouldn't explore, along with him playing around with that LM1 machine. And he made that very clear too, also in a 1981 interview with Melody Maker, calling that particular period in his career a revelation during the recording of Dirty Mind. And then he realized that he could write what was on his brain. And then he encountered some moments where he didn't really have to hide what was on his brain. The lyrics on the new album, straight from the heart, whereas his previous albums were more about feeling, about his dreams, and about fantasy, and they stuck to a formula, right? Because he was a new artist, so obviously he was trying to get some crossover success and really get taken seriously. And, even he said, in the midst right here that, he was used to playing top 40 style music, but that was probably why the music was big, because in that moment, he wanted to try something else. The first two albums he was writing to get a hit, but it was too easy for him. I don't like to do things that's easy. It's more of a challenge to write exactly what happens, exactly what he feels. So I can only imagine being someone that was very creative in that moment, but also really trying to figure out more things that they could say, right? And later on, we will get to hear from Peggy Mack. But even Peggy Mack made it clear that Prince's creative process was very sporadic and in the moment. And in a Pitchfork interview, she says sometimes he'd come with lyrics written on a hotel stationery. Sometimes he would sit at the piano and write on the back of track sheets or a napkin or whatever there was. He would always say, if I dreamed of another verse, I was coming in. He was constantly composing no matter where he was or what he was doing. So, of course, think about being on the road touring or just being out somewhere getting something to eat. You hear people talking about certain things or saying certain things, but also turning on the television, you probably see different things that kind of get you, or picking up the newspaper and something just kind of gets to you then. And keep in mind, we're years ahead of Sign of the Times. So already in the back of his mind, there was this opportunity to really address things that were really serious to Black America, to himself, but also so that he could really lend light on. I only write from experience, he says. I don't plan to shock people, but I write about things I guess people are afraid to talk about. Now, also, 1980, 1981, that was an election year. We're coming out of the Carter years, headed into, the Reagan years. And there was this really, really big, thing with nuclear war between the USSR and the United States, two superpowers clashing with each other that caused havoc and wreak havoc on everyone. And one of the things that kind of led to Reagan, becoming president was really his stance on having a strong defense and having something that could really kind of safeguard the United States in the midst of the Soviet kind of somewhat taking over, this old nuclear weapons culture, right? And also, too, even when you listen to the song, Ronnie Talked to Russia, it's roughly about a minute and a half, but it's literally sounding in the back of your mind like missiles launching or cannons going off or like some sort of nuclear weapon just sort of jumping. And, sonically, that really gave Prince an opportunity to really kind of personify what this could potentially be like if this were to happen. But musically, he was demonstrating that. But also, something really fascinating, ahead of Reagan becoming president, that was this whole, thing with, President Carter pulling out of the 1980 Summer Olympics, because of Afghanistan and, the Soviet not complying with his request to let, troops loose. And Prince, being an athlete, I'm sure somewhere in the back of his mind, that kind of played into it as well, because sports, as we all know, was something that he was into. So, I don't know if I'm reaching there, but I just think that was just a really interesting parallel to kind of bring up. But But I always say that Ronnie Talked to Russia was, in essence, one of the moments where he blatantly mentioned and stated on wax that this was something that gave him anxiety or something that he was really concerned about. And also, too, coming next year, 1999 was a record that really kind of touched on nuclear annihilation. How would you handle that if the world was to come to an end? And in his case, it was dancing, making love, having a good time. But in this particular instance, Ronnie Talked to Russia was really just a platform for him to really kind of address the president directly, but to really say that this was something that we should be concerned by. He was concerned as well. This is actually one of my favorite songs off of this album, and something that I also like to bring up whenever I'm talking about, controversy, was really how a great deal of the music has that punky sort of new wave electronica vibe going on. So even when you listen to the first couple of ticks and the first couple of bars on this song, it does kind of trip you out, and then the synths just kind of randomly get thrown in there. And what I really appreciate about this song is how the vocals are tracked on there. Part of it gives me kind of what The Clash was doing with certain songs on Sandinista, and also kind of what, reggae artists were doing over with some of their music, echo chamber going on some of the music. So, a lot of it was really music on both sides of the coin that really allowed the performer to really adjust these really politically strong messages and these social conscious overtones. So I think Prince was really, in essence, trying the same thing. And in this particular song, this song is amazing too, because it's a number of headlining stories that you physically get over this sort of alarming beat and this alarming sort of production. Most famously for me, the child murders between 1979 and 1981. She killed black children. She moved to Atlanta, bought a blue car. Some of the more meticulous details that were in several reports that came up about the Atlanta child murders. And if you guys haven't seen the HBO documentary that came out, I definitely highly recommend it. And then, of course, a whole nother situation that came up in this music. One of the biggest musicians of the time, John Lennon, was shot and killed by Mark David Chapman, December 8th, 1980, in front of the Dakota, New York. And, going back to, Prince's whole ideas of spirituality and religion, it was said that in many reports that John Lennon was shot and killed because of Chapman not really understanding his ties to social justice and some of his, ties to mentioning God in previous media reports. So I can imagine, Prince in the back of his mind, seeing this in the news and then thinking about kind of the phase that he was in his career and really thinking, if evil is something that will kill me because I'm addressing, spirituality, but I'm also bringing up politically conscious, messages that's coming out, then that may be something that I may need to consider. And then, of course, John Hinckley, his relation with some actress named Jodie Foster, tried to kill Reagan, which was another, mention that was actually in the song. And then, of course, ab scam. Somebody say ab scam. Corruption, greed, several government officials and public officials, basically spending a bunch, getting all this crazy amount of money, stealing all these goods, all this stuff is on record. So in the back of his mind, evil is something that really causes the headlines. And I know some of you guys are probably like that yourself, where you'll watch the news and you'll pay attention to certain things and you'll say, I can't watch the news anymore because it's just too overwhelming. It's too evil. It's nothing but bad people. So with something like Anti-Christian, it was kind of the same thing. Sonically, it's amazing. Very, very random. Very, 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 very punky, but also a song that really gave Prince the opportunity, again, ahead of Sign of the Times, where he's talking about the crack epidemic and talking about gangs and control, which is another instance that's going on in this whole particular song, gun control, racism, with the children being killed in Atlanta. I mean, it was a number of evils that permeated society, and Anti-Christian was really just that opportunity for him to really say, it's giving me anxiety, so I know it's giving you anxiety too. But until evil is handled or these things are resolved, I'm going to have to steer clear of any place I go because it's going to tear me apart. And again, and I just know I'm trying to make sure I stick with time, but I just want to make it very clear that, even with this particular project and Prince being able to explore more broader, more specific themes in his music, you know, he made it very clear, even in press, that even he was a lot happier doing things in that moment and really experimenting, because, you know, he's coming out of Dirty Mind where he's really doing something a little bit different. He's intriguing the minds of his listeners, intriguing the critics, really packing, you know, small venues and really developing a following. But at that moment, for him to be able to express himself a little bit differently, he realized, you know, like he said, that he could get away with whatever he wanted to do. And with his previous, because he felt like he was trying to get a hit himself, but also too, you know, he was a younger guy. He was 23 years old. So it was an opportunity for him to really grow in who he was as a person, but also who he was as a creator. The critics thought the same thing. Controversy narrowed in on his evolving worldview, bringing his songs out of the bedroom and onto the dance floor and out of the streets to protest against the political tension that would come to define the era. In taking on social issues, the artist assumes his place in the pantheon of Sly Stone-inspired utopian funksters like Rick James and George Clinton. And also, you know, thinking about a quote like that, a lot of his critics and his fans also link him to Stevie Wonder, link him to Sly Stone, who had very brilliant albums, but also experimented with different subtopics over the media they were bringing. So again, if Prince was going to be in sync and in line and in mentioning with these artists, then naturally he needed to do some of the things that they were doing. You know, remember, when in Rome, do what Romans do. And, you know, a whole nother critic, LA Times, same thing. Controversy was an even bolder, more eclectic collection that reached out to a rock audience. So again, fusing all these different musical elements, but really bringing a more astute lens to certain things really kind of made him a little bit more of a draw. And then, of course, you know, I want to kind of leave you all with a couple of quotes, one from Peggy Mack and just one from him. More than my songs have to do with sex. They have to do with one human's love for another, which goes deeper than anything political that anybody could possibly write about. The need for love, the need for sexuality, basic freedom, equality. I'm afraid of these things that don't necessarily come out. I think my problem is that my attitude is so sexual that it overshadows anything else that I might not be mature enough as a writer to bring it all out yet. So, you know, still there's sort of some level of uncertainty about what he was doing, but naturally recognizing that it felt right, it felt good, and it was something that was going to really make this album something special. And of course, you know, Peggy brought it home. Collaborated fairly nicely without much conversation about music. I got to have him at a really productive, prolific time. I got to watch him develop. He always knew who he was. Everybody else just needed to figure it out. So in closing, I just want to say that this particular project was fascinating because it really allowed for Prince to not only showcase more of his musical evolution, but it also showcased to his audience and to critics that he was a very serious artist that really paid close attention to his surroundings, but he was broadening his scope of what was going on around him, and that the music provided a great space, much like Twitter and social media and any of these platforms that we have now, to articulate these things. So hopefully you guys enjoyed another fascinating presentation with me, and I look forward to coming back in a couple of minutes to talk with some fellow colleagues about the impact of this project. Thank you so much for your time.
Man, thank you so much, man. You were burning up the chat. Talks folks were just really commenting on everything that you were saying. We really love the social, political, and historical overview that you gave, especially through the media lens, right? Looking at only how an artist is presenting oneself, but how the media works to scape and skew that. And so what we're going to do is, I guess for the sake of time, we're going to hold questions because we want to keep the train on. But I just wanted to come on and say thank you so much for always helping us understand, particularly with Prince. It's always interesting the way a Black person or an African person presents themselves and the way the media, and I always tell my students that there's two notions of you: who you think you are and who other people have a projection of who you are. And you've done an excellent job of showing us how Prince was creative enough to navigate that. So thank you so much.
Always a pleasure, my brother.